It's like the world's most sober award ceremony I've ever been to. When I started in this industry, we'd all be drunk at lunchtime, but now, no longer. Anyway. People are quite good-natured for their lack of alcohol.
Get you a vodka on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a hint. Interesting you should say that because WPP is publishing its quarterly earnings results tomorrow. So we know that you're busy preparing for the calls tomorrow, so we're very grateful to have you here. And he's here, Mark is here to give you a sneak peek of the results. No, not really. You couldn't do that. We had billed this as a fireside chat about leadership, and we are still going to do that, but with a twist. At the same time, we're actually going to announce one of our awards straight away. We're getting straight into it. One of our Media Leaders Awards, as you might know, is a special Judges' Choice Award. This award is given to someone who has inspired leaders in our industry and deserves recognition for the work that they do to influence and champion better business practice. In case you don't know how it works, is each of the awards judges, they can nominate one person who they believe deserves this accolade, and their fellow judges also vote for who they believe is worthy. Mark isn't the winner of this award, sorry. Maybe next year, you've got to be in it to win it. But he is here to collect it on behalf of this very worthy recipient. This year's winner is a posthumous award for someone who unfortunately died earlier this year at age 93. He's one of those rare people for whom we can say this industry as we know it would not exist if he hadn't been around. Such was the influence and regard that people had for him. I am, of course, talking about Jeremy Bullmore, who has won this year's Media Leaders Judges Special Choice Awards. For those of you who don't know, Jeremy Bullmore's career lasted over 70 years, having joined the ad agency J. Walter Thompson as a trainee copywriter in 1954. And get this, he retired in 1987 when Sir Martin Sorrell acquired JWT. He was an advocate for powerful creative advertising, of course, but also powerful creative writing. Later in life, he obviously became one of the most famous essayists and provocateurs, and as a copywriter, one of the most memorable brand taglines in advertising we've ever seen. You may have seen, buy something better, make something better, and people will buy it for Parker Pens, or I've never tried it because I don't like it for Guinness. As if that wasn't enough, his many contributions to advertising include being chairman of the Ad Association for most of the 80s. He was a director of Guardian Media Group from 1988 to 2001 and a director of WPP 1988 to 2004. Saddos like me, who, including tomorrow, quite often read WPP's quarterly reports, they'll have been treated over the years to Jeremy's forwards to the annual reports for WPP. And if that was enough, in 1985 he was appointed to CBE. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. And I do actually have the award to hand to you. It's all right. It's very heavy.
Thank you.
So I'll give that to you afterwards.
Okay.
It's too heavy. We'll do pictures at the end. But thank you for joining today. Tell us your personal experience of working with Jeremy and what impact did he have on your career?
Yeah, I think, maybe I'll sort of accept the award on Jeremy's behalf. I think those of you that knew him would say that Jeremy would be sort of mortified to receive an award, very embarrassed, sort of refused to turn up to collect it if he could, and would really rather not have got it at all. So I think we'll send this to Jeremy's family. And he was an amazing man. A campaign called him Adland's greatest philosopher. And shortly before he passed away, we created at WPP a website for him with all of his readings on, which I would really encourage you to look at. And I've got a couple of things we can maybe talk about later. I think it's sort of, in a funny way, safe to say I don't think I'd be here now if it weren't for Jeremy, not just literally, but also in my career. So I started in Farm Street in that funny little building in 1989, and I had an office at the back upstairs, and Jeremy had an office at the front by the boardroom in which only David Frost was allowed to smoke cigars. And Jeremy would sort of sit in his office, and if you were bored, and I sort of have quite a low boredom threshold, you could always go and chat to Jeremy for a bit. And I'd often go, probably most days, and spend like an hour, hour and a half in his office, sort of talking about stuff, about the business, about advertising, about how to run pitches, and we can talk about some of the examples. And I think that, and it came out at his funeral, and also the notes we got afterwards, he had a sort of immense amount of time for a large number of people, some of whom were important, and some of whom, like me at the time, were extremely unimportant. He sort of liked people and sometimes found them a little bit irritating, and then when he found you irritating, he'd certainly tell you. But I think he would impart his wisdom to an enormous number of people, and there's a large number of WPP fellows who would say, he would give people time just to come and knock on his door, and I think he used to like to spend. He spent time in the office, I'll say that, like controversial thing to say today. And actually, when we shut the office, when COVID came, you said Jeremy retired in 1980. Jeremy didn't ever actually really retire. He came into, when we moved from Farm Street to Sea Containers, one of the more difficult conversations I had to have was with Jeremy to say, well, look, we're moving out of this building. We don't really think we should stay here any longer, and we found him a little home inside Sea Containers on the 11th floor, where he'd happily come in, I think on Monday to Thursday, until COVID. And when COVID first came, I know there were a lot of awards dues at the time actually. I had to persuade him not to come into the office anymore and say, look, Jeremy, really don't think it's a good idea. Please. We don't want to kill you. Please just stop. Can you please stop coming into the office? And then obviously, we all shut down. He stayed at home, and he sadly never came in again. But I'd say, my experience, and the experience of a lot of people, was he just imparted a lot of wisdom and common sense to people.
And you talked a lot about going to his office and asking him for advice. So what advice did he give you that you can remember that really stands out and had an impact on you?
Yeah, I think, look, much of our business is common sense. I think much of business and life is common sense. Much of our business is common sense. And Jeremy would always sort of approach most problems, if you read his Agony Aunt or Agony Uncle columns in Campaign or elsewhere, you see it with a very, very large degree of common sense, and tell you kind of both how things are and how things are in a straightforward way. And he sort of had practical examples of, I remember him saying, when he was at JWT in the 60s and the telephone was invented, inside offices, if you were a new graduate, you weren't allowed to have a telephone for the first 6 months, because that would force you to go around the building and meet people and make things happen. So you weren't allowed just to sort of pick up the phone and say, can you do this? He wanted all the graduates inside J. Walter Thompson, at that time in 40 Berkeley Square, to wander around the building and actually meet people as they knew what got done. Well, I think that's something we can all learn from that today.
So what's the equivalent? Don't give any new starters computers for 6 months.
Yeah. Or maybe you should give people no email. Or, my favourite, have you asked someone to do it? Oh, yeah, I sent them an email. It's like, well, that's not actually the same as asking them to do something. He would say on pitches, he'd say, if you really want to win a pitch, just think of a client's problem and think about like the 3 things the client has, and then think of 3 really concrete pieces of work that you've done as an agency that answer exactly the same question that the client has. And if you do that, you've given the client, not only a reason to believe, evidence that you can do and solve the problem that they've got. And I sit in a lot of pitches and think they could benefit from some sort of simplicity of thought and straightforwardness. Some of it's in his writing, so I brought a couple of things along. I thought, when I looked at his website, so the first was, he was like most curious people, very, very innovative. But in this case, about TV advertising, we found this great memo he wrote to all producers, copied someone, Jeremy Bullmore, 635, and title Ridley Scott, underlined. I've recently met and talked to this young director and very much like to bring him to your attention. For those of you that don't know him and haven't heard of him, here are a few facts. He's about 30 and went into films after the Royal College of Art. He worked in the States with Richard Leacock, who's also worked in the design department of the BBC. As a director, he worked on Z cars and made several commercials. He seems to be a very intelligent and no-nonsense director who's genuinely interested in making commercials, not just for the loot. Although trained as a designer, he doesn't want to be classed as a designing director. He's done much of his work with Peter Simpsons, not exclusive with them. If you'd like to meet him or talk to him, you can find him at 58 Gilpin Avenue, East Sheen, SW14. There you are.
Is that still his address? Shall I write that down?
Or through his agent. Prospect, the telephone number is PRO, Prospect 774. That in those days you had anyway, it's quite old, 1965. So, and he wrote it, by the way, on the 29th of December. So you can see they were busy between Christmas and New Year, JWT.
That's fascinating. I mean, how typical was that of the man in terms of identifying talent, promoting talent?
Yeah, probably he was very, I think that's probably it. He was very good with talent and innovation and ideas and straightforwardness. Another thing he used to talk about a lot was sort of, if you think about the history of our business, from what was J. Walter Thompson in Berkeley Square back in the 60s, and it's a good example of what Jeremy used to talk about, was he invented Mr. Kipling's cakes I don't know whether he did personally, but we'll give him credit for it, at JWT. And Rank Hovis McDougall, who made flour, came to them and said, we've got all this flour, we don't really know what to do with it. And so the agency came up with the idea of making these cakes, or I guess they're sort of cakes, those biscuit, whatever they are, cakes. And they came up with the name. They invented Mr. Kipling and Mr. Kipling's cakes and the logo and the design and the packaging. And by the way, the advertising, and they did the media plan and they did the design. And I'm told they had a food design, a kitchen inside the agency, so they probably did the recipe. And even as far as they had some people that knew a little bit about industrial design to help them build. So if you think about, to some extent, what WPP is trying to be today in terms of, almost a sort of a full-service agency, able to solve, full service, able to solve a client's problems. That's what J. Walter Thompson was back in the 1960s. Then our agencies fragmented because, Greg knows, the media directors got the worst parking spaces, and 5 minutes at the end of the presentation, they were pissed off, said, we're out of here. And the designers realized they could build great design businesses, not there, and PR went its own way. And so the ability to solve holistic problems like that for clients got eroded. And so that's why clients have 20 or 30 agencies, and that's why they struggle to bring things together, and that's sort of the history of our industry. And so that was sort of another example of sort of looking backwards to look forwards, which is often, I guess, what happens.
Yeah, I really would recommend to anyone, if they haven't already, to look through The Best of Bullmore. Just fascinating and frankly really funny things he would write about as an agony aunt, if nothing else. For any rising stars, we're very, very sensitive and keen to promote rising stars. We have a Future 100 as part of the media leader. What advice, channeling Jeremy Bullmore from what you know and the advice you had, what advice would he have, do you think, for the next generation in this very different industry we have today?
I think he'd advise people to get to know clients, to be curious, to go out in the world and see what's going on, to have ideas to take to clients. I think, and even if I didn't, and I think he'd advise people to be back in the office a bit more often and be visible and be present, because if you're hidden away, however talented you are, no one's going to see that talent. So I think he would give people that advice. You think about JWT in those days, it was a sort of amazingly diverse, amazing people went through that organisation, for not just Jeremy, but Bridget Riley, the artist, worked there in the past, or, our industry attracted, and I think still attracts really a diversity of people, and I think he would bring those people into the company, and he'd sort of curious mind, so I think that would be the advice. I think he'd say spend as much time as you can with clients, because ultimately they're the people who, pay our bills and understanding what they need and how to help them succeed is most important. And actually brings me very on to my next piece of his writing, which I'll read some of these out because they're quite fun. So this is his email on 10 tried and trusted ways of pissing off your client.
Write these down.
This is like common sense advice from Jeremy. When facing up to a difficult situation, always write a letter rather than making a phone call. Or modern it could be an email rather than making a phone call. This both delays things for 3 days and make it clear to your client that you're running scared. Number 2, make sure your creatives are highly critical of your client's business while never having stepped foot inside their shop. When meeting with one client, take 11 from your side. On the same day, complain that you are making no profit on his business. Wait at least 3 months before including the name of the new brand manager on your circulation list, and then wait another 3 months before you get the spelling right. Leave every meeting at least once to take another client's phone call. On your return, 20 minutes later, praise the other client for the size of his fee and personal charm. Now you can see the gender. We didn't have gender diversity back then. Never answer a client's question directly. Instead, point out in front of his superior that he's asked the wrong question. Ensure the only person with whom your client has regular contact is your voicemail. Be consistently critical of one client to another client and vice versa. And install internal disciplines to ensure that all major changes in account group staffing are communicated to your client by your receptionist. And then the last one, when you fly with your client, see him or her settled comfortably in economy before you yourself go to the front. And that has happened, not to me. Well, anyway, that does happen when I go to Cannes, I can assure you.
Oh dear. Thank you so much. Jeremy Bullmore gone, but certainly won't be forgotten in a hurry. Please give a big hand to Mark Read.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.